All right.
We're All right, Ian's already in here.
Ian's ready to go.
So, all right, let's go live chat. We're in. We are live. Wait, let me make sure.
Yeah, we're good, I think.
I think I have, but I have it up here just in case.
Oh. We're good.
We're good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool.
Present. Cool.
Hope you guys are doing well. Who's ever actually watching?
ComCode.
Yeah. This is our third or fourth?
This is our third. The overall sixth.
Yeah, that sounds
the
right.
Overall sixth presentation.
ComCode. We got
thanks, Mike.
2 ComCode members in the chat.
That's right. All right, so CARSec and AMSec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is on today's agenda? Just gonna go over, update on our projects. If you've seen my blog post, at least it kind of touches on the. Actually, I don't know if my blog post got released yet, but it touches on the same things that I'll be talking about in the stream here. I don't know about you, Austin, but.
Yeah. My blog posts have been kind of going over like the framework bit by bit. So there's a lot more that goes into the blog posts than I do on the presentation. So I've just been picking some things out. But we'll be talking about like physical security on my end.
Nice. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Uh-oh. What'd you do?
I don't know what I did. I just hope everything's working. So yeah, my name is William Alber. Currently headed into my senior year at Champlain College, majoring in computer networking and cybersecurity. My background's in networking and software development as well as hardware repair. And you can find my LinkedIn at that link right on the screen. And that'll also be down in the description of the video too.
I'm Austin Grupposo. I'm going into my junior year at Champlain. My LinkedIn is also right there, and there's a bunch of links down in the description, including to the blog post that we mentioned, as well as ComCode, MCSP, all that jazz. I'm on the AMSec, Additive Manufacturing, if you don't remember, which is essentially like 3D printing and laser etching and all of that fun stuff.
Nice. All right, so CARSec for this week. Just what's new, really. I continued to research a lot of the regulations that I've been talking about in past videos, as well as diving into the ecosystem of connected cars and their technologies, and also like autonomous vehicles and what shortcomings they have that they have to overcome. And then new for the past week or so, I've started looking into a lot of the preemptive measures that organizations as a whole, but mostly that automobile organizations can take in order to help like secure their like back end side of things more so than the vehicle themselves. So starting off looking at penetration testing, it's a really common thing within cybersecurity, and just like it's growing in popularity in businesses as a whole. So what is it? For those of you who don't know, it's attempts to evaluate the security of IT infrastructure by usually hiring an outside like firm to attempt to like exploit vulnerabilities, but it's all done within a safe manner, so like there's no real risk to the organization. In terms of vehicles, it can be done just like that on the back end of things, looking at like the internal network of the organization or their file server or just their policies in general. But when it comes to vehicles, you can look at securing the communications that the vehicle uses. So that's like Bluetooth and wireless and mobile communications, but you can also dive into the electronic control units within the car and try and exploit some vulnerabilities that are known within them to access sections of the car that you shouldn't be able to, because that would lead to a lot of issues down the line for automobile makers. And that's a really popular, or at least it's gaining popularity really quickly, is car hacking in general. It's slowly starting to get featured more and more at different cybersecurity conferences like DEF CON and Pwn to Own. And there's whole communities like regarding it across the country and the world, really. So what comes from penetration testing? Usually, at the end of a penetration test, the organization will be given some sort of report that details what they did, why they did it, how they did it, as well as sometimes what steps an organization can take moving forward to fix the things that they found within their tests. And then what organization should perform these? Really, every organization that like can afford them, I guess you should say, because they can get fairly expensive. Obviously, if you're like some mom and pop shop, you don't need to go get a penetration test, but big organizations, especially the ones that I've been looking into in terms of automotive manufacturers, definitely if they have the resources should be looking to run these tests on their network, just because it does provide that further step of security within organizations. And then there's one more question listed on there, and that's is there any like downsides to penetration testing? And there are like one or two, but they can all be overcome pretty easily. The first one being that you really have to trust the person that's running the test, because you're going to give them complete access to your network. So like you have to trust that the person's not going to leave any backdoors or create any openings for other attackers to exploit, because that would lead to a lot of bad things down the line, as well as if you set up a test but you don't let the auditor go to places that you don't want them to just because you know they're not secure, that's not going to lead to realistic outcomes within the test. So making sure that they have access to like everything except for the super secure stuff helps to create the greatest like chance of success from the test. So the normal steps for penetration testing this turns back to what sort of is a penetration test, but you start with preparation, so just kind of talking to the organization, figuring out what their needs are, if they know of any shortcomings that they might have, you get those laid out on the table. Then you move to information gathering, so that's sort of the area where you're going to be looking at the network and the layout, looking at their policies that they have to try and figure out right off the bat if you know that there's any shortcomings that you can exploit. From there, you're going to do some like risk analysis just to make sure that if you do something that's like can possibly mess something up, that it's not like that grand of a failure that you're going to cause complete like outages for the company for like a couple days. Like you want to make sure that everything you're doing doesn't affect the day-to-day operations of the organization. And then after you've done those first three things, you're going to actually go about testing and doing the work that you're hired to do and going in and finding the vulnerabilities within the company. And then after all that testing's done, and penetration tests can take weeks, if not months on some really large operations. After all that's done, you're going to do a final analysis, which is what I was talking about earlier, is giving that report to the company detailing everything that went on. So that's a first step that companies can take to be preemptive with cybersecurity. The second one that I've been looking at is supply chain security. And this focuses on the risk management of external suppliers, as well as transportation of like the hardware and software that you're running on anything really at all that happens on a day-to-day basis. So why focus on it? It really helps to mitigate a lot of the risks that come with working with outside suppliers for things, because if they're giving you insecure software, then that's just going to provide an opening for vulnerabilities and attackers to come into your network. And a really good real-world relevance to this is the SolarWinds and Kaseya hacks that happened and are still happening today, I guess, because SolarWinds just found out that there's another vulnerability like 2 days ago. Yeah. And those exploits both come from the fact that SolarWinds supplies their software to a lot of different organizations. So all of those organizations have this one insecure software that just, once that exploit is known to the public, anyone can just go in and pretty easily just crack whatever software they have and then have an into their company. So to what extent should supply chain security be focused on? Really, for like the highest security of environments, you should do it all the way down your supply chain. So looking at the software and what you're using to like get it from, but as well as like with hardware, like say someone creates the RAM for your computer, so you want to make sure that like, the RAM's a bad example. Say someone creates like the CPU for your computer, so like you want to make sure that how they're creating it is secure, but then you also want to make sure that when they're being transported to you, there's no chance for like tampering with it or anything, as well as like installing it and then setting it up. For every single step of the way, you want to make sure that everything's being done securely. And with that said, a lot of the best practices come from actually working with the third parties to make sure that they have sort of a list of practices that can be included in like a contract that can be laid out and signed and then assessed throughout the stages of development with that company. So like basically when you sign that contract, you say you're going to follow these steps, and if you don't, you can go back and assess them and be like, we don't think that you held this standard while you were developing the product, so they can go ahead and cut the contract out. And that's just provides a really good standard for companies to be like reliant on each other throughout development and implementation of products. And then the final thing that I'm looking at, pretty new-ish in terms of software. A lot of companies are starting to get on board with this concept, and it's secure software development. And it's the idea of that from the thought of a piece of software being created, you're going to be thinking of security. So all the way from the ground up, you're thinking that security needs to be at the forefront of this software. So if we look at it using a software development life cycle, you're sort of at each stage of that, you're looking at security. So the basics of a development lifestyle go from defining, designing, development, testing, deploying, and then maintaining that software. So at every single step of that cycle, you're going to be saying, all right, how can we make it secure, or what possible like vulnerabilities are going to be there that we can make secure? Because if you have a more secure software, it's going to make it that much harder for attackers to do anything with that. Instead of just presenting this piece of software where you developed it with no thought of cybersecurity, just presenting that out to the market, that leads to a lot more issues with cybersecurity down the line than where you sort of thought each step about cybersecurity. And then finally, if you do all these things together, it creates this sort of in-depth approach to cybersecurity where, sure, even though your pen test might have missed this thing, you're developing your software well enough that it doesn't matter, or that your supply chain, one of your contracts, one of the people that you had on contract, you found to be taking shortcuts and they weren't completely covering it, but you figured that out through a pen test that you conducted. It just sort of, these three things can all work together very well to make sure that organizations are being as secure as possible throughout each stage of like the life cycle. So like all this together doesn't entirely focus on automotive, the world of automotive manufacturing really at all, but it focuses a lot on just like the broad realm of just businesses today, I guess, because really any business can take these three steps and work with them in order to maintain and develop their cybersecurity culture. But part of my work is to help figure out what the best steps are for companies to take in the automotive world, and I thought this was a really good place to take it. So yeah, that's the end of my section. Austin?
All right.
Take it away.
So over the past few weeks, I've been talking about CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is a new framework from the Department of Defense, and it's built up of 17 different what they call capability domains that organizations need to adhere to in order to get this certification, in order to be able to bid on federal contracts. Because with additive manufacturing, a lot of the work that these organizations do is done through different federal agencies, whether it's, they own a printer that needs maintenance done on it, or they need certain supplies and materials, whatever it is. federal contracts can be something as simple as, an FBI field office needs paper clips, and that requires a federal contract. So even the most simple things still will require this certification in some capacity. And one of those capability domains is physical security. So I just wanted to go through different aspects of physical security, because it's something where I notice a lot that physical security and cybersecurity are kind of looked at in two different levels, whereas I think that they should be more integrated because they kind of go hand in hand. I think it should just be, security in general. So as time goes on, the line is blurring between physical and cybersecurity. There's a lot of technology-oriented countermeasures that are becoming increasingly common in these organizations. It's not as simple as just having, a deadbolt lock on your door anymore to really be a truly physically secure environment. And physical security, even though it is its own domain under the CMMC, it kind of goes into, a bunch of stuff that you see here: asset management, access control, personnel security, situational awareness. Physical security is kind of implanted in every aspect of cybersecurity, which is why they really do go hand in hand. And I always tell people, for an example, you can have the best encryption, the best firewall, the best password, but, if someone has physical access to your system, if they can just, walk in and physically touch your system, take your laptop, whatever it is, that kind of stuff is kind of irrelevant in that case, which is why physical security is so important. So one of the main aspects to pay attention to during physical security are possible social engineering attacks. And a lot of times social engineering is a term that you hear used with things like, phishing, where someone, sends an email, or, someone does a phone call, whatever, pretending to be someone that they're not. Just kind of, it's the same type of cycle. But social engineering can actually be used a lot to gain physical access to certain sites. There's a lot of reported cases of individuals, pretending to either be new hires or pre-existing employees. If you're a huge company with thousands of employees at any given site, you're not going to know every single employee there. So if someone says yeah, I work here, at first glance you might not really question that. And then there's people who, whether they're mail or like a UPS delivery individual, or there's been reported cases of people coming in with bottles of Poland Spring for water coolers, but they don't work for Poland Spring. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of trick people into getting into a building, and that's kind of what this cycle here is. So it starts with investigate. So for example, say you are someone that, you get a uniform, you're dressed up like a UPS delivery driver, right? And you have a bunch of boxes. You would start with investigation, as in trying to figure out okay, who is working what days, who is, more susceptible to this type of social engineering, what doors can I go in, what doors would, the average, the real UPS driver normally go in, stuff like that. And then they move on to hooking, which is when you actually kind of engage an individual. So whether it's someone at the front desk, like some type of secretary, or front door security, whatever it might be, kind of starting the act in a way, and that's when it goes into the play section, where you kind of continue engaging with that individual. You make up a believable story, nothing too crazy. It's often the simplest stories that actually get people. We all see those emails that go around about they're a prince in a foreign country and they need your money for help, they need your bank account. It's often the most believable things, like, hey, I have a delivery for so-and-so, whether you figure out, some of the individuals within the companies, or if it's a bigger company, some of the, C-level executives are more well-known. You're like, hey, I have a delivery for this person. I was told to deliver it to them personally because it's secure documents, or it's a secure system, whatever it is. Something simple like that is more believable than, something as far-fetched as I need access to your bank account. And then the last vital step that a lot of people mess up on, which is a good thing, is the escape step. Really, you want to, not only do you want to escape in a believable way, but you want to escape without leaving traces behind. The most suspicious thing that normally happens, and the reason why these social engineering attacks sometimes fail, is that things just kind of end abruptly. You get into the building, and as soon as you're in, you drop the act. You're like, okay, I'm going to put this package down. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a UPS person anymore. When things end abruptly like that, that's when people start to ask questions, and that's why these types of individuals, typically it's for like corporate espionage, not necessarily like individual malicious action, but something like intellectual property theft is a lot of times why this happens. They get very ambitious once they gain access to a building, and they kind of let their guard down, and that's when people start to ask questions and start to think that maybe that person shouldn't be here, which is a good thing. But that is the whole social engineering cycle. And going along with that, there's also tailgating or piggybacking. This is an example of that. So on the left side of the screen, you have a real employee at this fake company, and they are going into a secure area. It can be a security operations center. It can be a server room. It can just be an inventory room, whatever it might be. And on the right side, you have a public area. Now, a lot of times with tailgating, people kind of think of it as like, okay, you need a badge to get into the front door, or you need to get a badge to get into the door to get into the site itself. And, you have some random person from outside the company kind of hanging around outside trying to gain access. A lot of times when tailgating is a real issue, it's with internal espionage. It's when you have someone that does work for that company, but they don't necessarily have access to that particular area. So if you have someone working in, IT help desk who's not really supposed to be in the, secure intellectual, where you store intellectual property, but they'll still kind of go in there. A lot of times it can be like, oh, I'm working on this thing, I'm supposed to be here, whatever it is. It's usually people inside the company that get away with tailgating the most. And tailgating is essentially, so you have this individual on the left, they're going through this door, they've just gone through, it's open, and they had to badge in to get in, which we've talked in the past, that kind of stuff should always be logged, so you know this kind of stuff is going on. And then the person on the right who's kind of hanging out in this public area, not necessarily doing anything wrong by being there. Perhaps they're a marketing or an IT employee who's just hanging out in this area. And then as the doors open, before it closes, they just kind of slip in, or they're like, oh, I'm right behind you, something like that. And a lot of times people don't really think, and they're like, oh, this person's coming, they're walking with authority, they look like they should be here, I'm going to hold the door for them and be nice. I know personally, if someone, there's been times even here at the Leahy Center where people are like, can you let me into the building? It feels weird to like say like, no, I can't. But at the same time, it's like this is the reason why. There are a lot of systems actually that are kind of out there that are being implemented now, where they're like anti-tailgating cameras, and they're kind of like sensors in the secure area, so it would kind of be on the ceiling, and it has direct connection to the access control box. So when you badge into the door, that sensor turns on, and if one person badges in, this is why even if you both, there's 2-3 people that all have access to a specific area, even if the door is already open, you should still badge in to kind of log like I've been here, because the way this camera works is if one person badges in and that sensor sees more than one person, sees 2 or 3 people, it sets off either a silent alarm or it kind of does like an audible alert like, hey, there's someone behind you, and it's meant to kind of dispel tailgating, where if one person badges in, it should only see one person walking through the door. Another thing to talk about is shredding documents. That's another big aspect of physical security. Shredding documents can help prevent things like identity theft, intellectual property theft. A lot of it can be used for open source intelligence for these social engineering attacks. A lot of times if things aren't disposed of properly, There's these people that are dumpster divers that will go through, get these documents, and even if it doesn't seem like it's much, you could just have, something that someone hand wrote, and it's like, oh, right there, I know a little bit more about that person or what they're currently doing at this business. And it can kind of be used, there's been reported instances of people, going through the trash, and they see the, like printed out emails, or they see notes for slide decks or stuff. They're like, oh, this person is currently working on a new vulnerability management program for the company. And then they use that, they'll either through phishing attacks or through, physical social engineering, like, hey, I heard you're working on so-and-so, I'm actually an employee of this company that you're working with, or something like that. Which is why, like, shredding documents is actually a big requirement for a lot of frameworks. For this reason, there are full companies dedicated to just secure shredding of documents, where you put them in a collection bin at your company, and they'll come by either weekly, bi-weekly, depending on what it is, and they'll take it to an off-site where it's disposed of in, some type of giant furnace or whatever it is. But I think one of the biggest ones is called Shred It, which is pretty obvious. Financial fraud is another one. A lot of times people, they can write, void on a check and just throw it in the trash and think that's good enough, but there's a lot of stuff that can go into it. They still have your bank account number, routing number, stuff like that. Even the most simplest things can still be a tool for malicious actors. And then I didn't put full slides for all these, but there's a few other important tasks to talk about with physical security. One of them is employee awareness training. So kind of like, like this presentation I'm giving now, having that kind of talk with your employees, so they know, for example, why tailgating is such an issue, why you shouldn't just recycle certain documents, why you should be careful who you talk to in the building or who you give access to, stuff like that. That's also a big requirement with a lot of other frameworks, is that awareness training. There's a bunch of different companies that will do it for organizations, third-party companies. Some bigger organizations kind of develop it in-house. It really depends on how you want to do it. Guest Wi-Fi and segmented networks, that goes a little bit less into physical security, but it still kind of goes hand in hand. Making sure that you have things set up for when people are in the building, and they're permitted to be in the building, but they're not necessarily permitted to be engaging in business activities, whether it's someone coming in for an interview, delivery driver, a new hire where they're not necessarily onboarded, stuff like that. Simply having free open Wi-Fi for these guests specifically, even if it's password protected, is often the best thing to do. It can kind of dispel them from peeking around at things that they shouldn't. And then securing doors and windows with locks. I mentioned there's things like RFID, NFC, like badge readers. There's biometrics where thumbprints, iris scans, face scans, stuff like that. A lot of the most secure areas and organizations will use a combination of both, or multiple different security measures. Windows are it's kind of something else that a lot of people don't think about. Making sure that windows are locked or that they're secure and they can't be opened. Or if you have even a door that isn't necessarily thought of as something problematic, that it still has some type of lock on it should it become problematic. It's just something good to keep note of. Accounting for lost or stolen devices is very important. Every organization should have some type of program set up where if a device is lost or it's stolen, that it can be reported, and therefore it can either be locked down remotely or it can be wiped remotely, stuff like that. This is especially important for things like ID badges. Like even for us here at Champlain, if you lose your student ID is your badge to get into your dorm or to get into certain buildings. If you lose it, you're supposed to report it, and they deactivate it so people can't use it, which is something that you want to do right away, because otherwise, if you lose it, doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to find it and use it. But if it's specifically stolen, chances are it was stolen for a reason, and that person wants to gain access to places that they can't normally gain access. And then keeping secure systems physically segmented. This is like, when you have, someone like, like front desk marketing, stuff like that. There's a lot of companies that have these like open areas where everyone has their own little cubicle with like, marketing or sales, stuff like that. And they have secure information. Those systems are still locked down, but it's a little bit different than when you have, your cybersecurity team or your DevOps team working on intellectual property. Those systems are kind of behind a segmented door. They're not really out there in the open. And it's why departments are often segmented in these companies. It isn't just for convenience to make sure like, all the marketing people are in one place, all the developers are in another place. A lot of times it's because those systems shouldn't really clash and you shouldn't have the same access to one system that you do to another. So keeping those physically segmented kind of prevents issues down the line. And then physically monitoring of sites managed by dedicated personnel. So this is a big one. A lot of times people are like, okay, we'll install security cameras, we'll install door locks, all this stuff. When people are onboarded, we'll just have IT give them a new badge, and that's that. And they have these things like these cameras, these motion detectors, but nobody's really dedicated to be in charge of it. There's not one person, or, we'll give it like, okay, we'll give it to IT, or we'll give it to, front desk, whatever it is. Instead of having someone specifically in charge of physical security who is a more secure-minded individual, it's kind of important to have that communication, have that documentation, to know that if there's a physical security incident, there is one specific person to go to. Because I know a lot of times it's kind of just, we'll put up these cameras and that's that. But if no one's really in charge of actively monitoring it, or no one's in charge of making sure that those things are up to date, constantly online, they can, monitor them during the day, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose. I don't know why that's going through again. I think that's all I have. All right, so I did notice that Kai had a question. She asked, how secure is RFID? Not very, realistically. RFID is very useful for identification purposes, being able to put it up to a badge reader and it's logged, like, okay, we'll enter the building at this time, for incident tracing. But all in all, it's very easy to copy. That's why with a lot of more secure, larger organizations, there's a few different things. I know at one of the companies that I worked at in the past, they gave us specifically like a wallet just for our badge, that it was kind of like almost like a Faraday cage wallet in a way that blocks anyone from reading or copying RFID. And then it had like a button where the card would kind of like slide out of it, so you can use it on a door scanner and then you can put it back. To make sure that it's not exposed for longer than it needs to be for that exact reason, so people can't copy it. But yeah, RFID and that kind of stuff isn't the most secure. It's pretty easy to bypass, which is why it kind of goes hand in hand. It's very rare that you'll see, a door with an RFID scanner and not a camera right above it, stuff like that. Like even here in the Leahy Center, it's like that, just to kind of have that accountability. And it's why some of the most secure areas have things beyond just badge reading. You have thumbprints, stuff like that. Ian asked, what would be the best practices if you notice any form of social engineering? So that's a good question. A lot of organizations will kind of outline that in their employee awareness training, which is another thing that I mentioned earlier. But the most important thing is, depending on what it is, when you see something like, you notice someone trying to gain access to a building that's not there, you can do one of two things. If they're an employee that, is actively working there, but they're not necessarily supposed to be in this area, that's something that you can report to, their management. If they're an individual who you've never seen before, they're probably from outside the organization, they're trying to gain access, it's not an issue to call the police in that case, because that's something that's it is a crime in itself. But most importantly is to alert someone else. Don't just necessarily keep it to yourself. Always go up to the highest person that you have relations with, and in a lot of cases it is key to go to whoever the security individual is themselves. Like I said, having a dedicated physical security personnel is important, but even if it's something like going to, an information security officer who's kind of in charge of those systems, it's also important. As long as someone else knows and it's not just you, for multiple reasons. One, it could be, down the line, it could turn into, a he said, she said kind of situation. But also it's important that other people know and are aware that not only did this happen, but there could be further attempts in the future because someone is actively, monitoring the situation.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions either about physical security stuff or, the CARSec stuff that Will talked about? Nice.
So you mentioned that RFID isn't secure. Is that as a protocol, or do you simply just mean that like the fact that the badges can be so easily just like swiped and scanned, copied, and
yeah, it's because the protocol itself is definitely insecure, but it's mostly because the readers can just be, tricked very, very easily. Stuff like that.
So give me a second.
I'm guessing Ian has a question that he's formulating.
We'll give him some time.
In the meantime, check out the MCSP Munich Cyber Security Program in the Leahy Center on LinkedIn. That's where these, blog posts are posted, where you'll find out about these streams, even though they're at the same time every week.
Yeah.
Although from now on they will be at noon Eastern instead of 1 p.m. Eastern.
And if you want to be alerted too, you can subscribe to the Leahy Center.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think then you'll get a notification.
Hit the notification bell. I don't know what other videos will be going up in the future outside of this program, but I do know that there are things in the work for a few different video or stream series in relation to other projects besides just the ComCode partnership. So could be cool to keep up with.
I think we'll be having another four lunch and learn sessions.
Yeah, I think so. Sounds about right.
We'll only be featured in 2, but
but definitely next week will be Michael and I think Kaya.
Yeah, Kaya will be back
for MedSec and DFIR. For car security, would there need to be more specialized version of pen testing for smart cars and car security in general?
So like I said, with roughly yes. What is it? All right. So like I said, for penetration testing in general, you're looking at a lot of the back end stuff, so like the network and the sort of security management and the guidelines that an organization has in place. With vehicle and penetration testing, you can look at all that, but you can also look at the actual car as its own network and its own sort of thing to test. So you can go in and try and look at the Bluetooth stack or the wireless stack or the mobile communications that it can use. You can look at the ECUs, the electronic control units, because an ECU basically controls a cyber physical device, which means it's a sort of a physical device that controls something, but that device is controlled by a computer algorithm. So for instance, like the steering assist on a lot of cars that we see now, the lane keep assist, so it makes your drive a little easier. That basically is a cyber physical system in the sense that the steering wheel is able to turn based on what a computer device is sensing and seeing, usually through like cameras or whatever that are sensing the lines on the road. So you can go in and that one device correlates to an ECU. So let's say that you were able to crack the Bluetooth stack and gain access to the internal network within the car. If you somehow, through usually reverse engineering or just time, I guess, of just like tracking what commands are being sent through the car as you drive, you can figure out where the ECU that controls the lane keep assist is, and you can try and activate that steering wheel to do things that you want it to do without the car really having a say in it. there are on a lot of cars, the ECUs are a little smarter, and they'll shut down spoofed messages if they are like very sure that it's spoofed. But it's hard for cars to make that call, because you don't want the car to be like, oh, you're braking really hard. No, I don't think that's a actual
that's
thing.
a hacker.
Yeah, that's
We're
a
not
hacker.
gonna
We're
break.
not going to do that, and then you smash into the back of a car. So that, in that sense, it makes it hard for a lot of vehicles to keep their internal network secure. But there's certainly a difference between penetration testing and automotive penetration testing.
Yeah, but it does use make the use of a lot of technologies that are used in other systems, like you mentioned, like Bluetooth and stuff like that. So can you see in the future, not necessarily, maybe not one particular organization, but kind of breaking up of, kind of splitting into different forms of pen testing? Like you'll have some organizations that you can hire, obviously, for your traditional pen testing, but you'll have some organizations dedicated to just automotives or just vehicles.
Yeah, so we're sort of seeing that now. Is there's a couple companies that have been created since about 2015 that are working on cybersecurity for automotive vehicles, mostly autonomous cars in that sense, because that's where the future is heading. But a lot of the things that I've been seeing online is that car hacking, it's a very expensive thing. So a lot of pen testing companies aren't getting involved in it because a lot of the ways that it happens is that someone wants to investigate how secure Toyota is. So they go and they have to go buy their own Toyota Corolla or whatever, so they can take it apart, figure out the layout of the ECUs, and then go back in and figure out a more broad understanding of how each car on the road works. So like, it makes it hard for people who want to get into the field of pen testing cars to actually do it, because there's a lot of back end capital.
You need like a very, very large pen testing organization with lots of funding.
Yeah, and a lot of automotive companies,
stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of automotive companies aren't using pen testing as their main way of doing things. They're taking some of the other steps that I mentioned.
Yeah, and the hardest part about pen testing is, you could have a huge organization, like General Motors, who could definitely afford to set up their own internal, like they have an internal security team. They don't hire third-party security, but you can't really have an internal pen testing team, because that's kind of, conflicting of interests, and they kind of defeats the whole purpose. Yeah,
because they can say, oh, whatever, it's not that important.
Yeah.
Where in the grand scheme of things, it is.
Yeah, so stay tuned when Will and I get a Tesla Cybertruck and we pen test it live on YouTube.
Could happen.
It could. It's possible.
Yeah.
Never say never.
I'm gonna say never in this case. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. I don't think anyone else is gonna pop up with any questions. We're about to hit the end of our time frame. But yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for stopping by. See you in 2 weeks.